Welcome into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you here. This is the first weekend in September, and I can't believe where the year has gone by already. It's been absolutely crazy this summer, how many things have just come and gone. And it seems like, February was like a month ago, not, 6, 7 months ago. So this is crazy. We're getting into all the members, September, October, December, November, all these months coming into the end of 2024. So a little bit crazy, a lot's going on. And this is our monthly one-on-one where I get to catch you up on some things going on behind the scenes with the Cool Grandpa podcast, as well as being able to share some thoughts on some ideas and some topics that are important for not only just grandfathers, but also grandparents as well. We've got a lot of stuff that is definitely crossover that's not just guy-centric, but grandmas can use this information and have their input and their take on these different things. So I'm happy to share this with you. Before we get started, though, I want to remind you, starting on Sunday is Grandparents Week. And Grandparents Week, you've heard me talking about that, is being put on by Grandparents Academy. And it's something that really helps to celebrate and educate grandparents. So this is a free event. I've got a link down in the show notes where you can sign up and get your free admission to this Grandparents Week, where you're going to hear all sorts of different experts talking about grandparenting and grandparenting related topics. There's also an option for you to join in and sign up for more of a paid behind the scenes VIP ticket for this. But regardless if you choose the free option or the VIP option, I just would really love to see you there. We've grown this week by a tremendous amount over the first year or so that this has been going on. So I know I had an episode with Aaron, and who's the host and founder of Grandparents Academy, a few episodes back. So you can check that out if you want more details about Grandparents Week. I want to let you know I've got the second Cracker Barrel or roundtable discussion is all set to be recorded in a few weeks. This is going to be absolutely a fantastic topic. We're just going to tackle one topic. What this topic is going to be is, what do moms and even grandmas need from grandfathers? And this is going to be great. I'm going to have a bunch of women on that are going to help me out. They're experts. Some of them have been guests on the show before, and I'm going to get their input. So this is going to be a little way for grandparents to maybe get some behind the scenes kind of information. I'll do a little recon for the gents out there and figure out how we can better support our daughters, our daughter-in-laws, and our wives and partners, and what do we need to do? How can we step up? How can we support them in their roles as mothers and grandmothers? I am also working on developing some merchandise. I've had some people talk about the logo, the old man. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got it up on my shirt. But the kind of the guy with the glasses and the hat and the beard, I've had some people talk about that. And so I'm just doing a few different items. One's going to be a ball cap. We're going to have a polo shirt, and we're going to have the little car discs that these little things you put in the bottom of your cup holders that wick away some of the moisture and condensation on those hot days. And we're going to have some glasses and some mugs that have the logo on it. Some are going to say "One Cool Grandpa," and some are just going to be the logo. So once I have that up, hopefully within the next week or two, we'll be able to announce that, and you guys can go in and start checking out that merch and seeing if there's anything in there that makes sense for you to order for the grandfather in your life, maybe over for Christmas or the holidays this year as a cool, different gift. I do want to also remind everybody, I've got the 200th episode has been recorded with my friend Steve Owens from Fascination Street. So be sure to go over and check out Fascination Street podcast and see what Steve's about. He's an awesome dude that's really been a great mentor and a friend to me. We got together for just about an hour and talked about the Cool Grandpa podcast, talked about some of the different things that I've been involved in, and just had a great way to celebrate 200 episodes. Essentially it's 4 years of me doing this. Actually, it's over 4 years because I started out every other week for a while until I got things going and got the processes down. So again, the 200th episode will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And then next week, we've got Patrick Brady on. Now, Patrick Brady is a founder of this application called Heritage HQ. And this is a fantastic application that marries up genealogy with family artifacts. So you can order up and put in pictures and sound recordings and do all sorts of things on this Heritage HQ. We're going to learn more about that. And we're going to learn how grandparents can help start filling in some of the blanks, creating those family trees, but doing it in a way that you've got it shared digitally amongst all your family members and that they can contribute to this as well. So it's a great way to, I think, doing these genealogy projects, and maybe not super in depth, but doing some that really help grandparents and grandkids become connected and hear stories of ancestors and people that have played a large part in everybody's lives within the family. So what I want to do now is pivot over to the thoughts that I had for this week. And if you guys are watching this on YouTube, I'm sorry, I've got my eyes going to some notes here because I definitely want to make sure I get some of these things right. Now, DeeDee More from More Than Grand has written a blog that came out on September 3rd. It's called A Grandparent's Response to the Surgeon General's Advisory on Parents' Mental Health. And this was a really impactful blog article in that it really shows how stressed out that a lot of our adult children are, and a lot of our even friends at work and at church and school and wherever that are raising kids, just what's going on with them. And I know it's almost a cliche, right? Every generation, it's either tougher or easier than the previous generation. But there's some interesting data that's behind this. So I want to read from 2023 data that 33% of parents experience high levels of stress versus 20% of other adults. And I think that kind of makes sense. If you're other adults, you're not worried necessarily about your kids, about are they missing school? Are they hanging out with the wrong crowd? Typical kind of parent stressors. And so that kind of makes sense. Now, here's the other part of this, though, is that approximately 48% of parents, when they are feeling stressed out, it's most days it's overwhelming, which means that you're caught between fight, flight, and paralyzed, right? Those are kind of the responses that we have when we're under stress, and whether it's a big lion chasing us across the savannah, or it's trying to make a decision on, do we pay bills or buy groceries? Those stresses can be overwhelming and really causes us to do one of those three things or a combination of those three things. So 48% of parents, most days, the stress is overwhelming versus 26% of other adults. So that is a huge difference, almost 20% different between what feeling just overwhelmed between parents and versus other adults. And I don't know all the data that, the inputs behind that. I'm going to figure that it's going to be a lot of the traditional finances, job insecurity. And especially when this is coming off of 2023, we're only a couple of years out of some of the lockdowns, some of the things that were going on with the COVID epidemic. And so I think there's probably a lot of that. It would be interesting to see what 2024, 2025 data would be, and even data before the pandemic. see if we do see a spike in any of those numbers. But it's something to be aware of that, hey, if your adult children and the parents of your grandchildren are feeling stressed, when they feel stressed, they feel really stressed. That it's just overwhelming. They don't see a way that they can process how they can manage that stress. Which then of course leads to not making great decisions that can have long term effects. So just kind of interesting data there. In 2021, they're reporting that 65% of parents and guardians and 77% of single parents experience loneliness versus 55% of non parents. I think this kind of really tracks in with a couple of different things. And this is just me talking here, right? We had Gene Berenson from the Clay Center for Young Healthy Minds was on, and we were talking about teen loneliness and how that epidemic of teen loneliness really started mid 70s and it's just been growing, right? So of course, teens eventually they grow up and they become young adults and they become parents and guardians and they become single parents maybe. And so that idea of loneliness and isolation can just be exacerbated, especially when you introduce children to that mix, because sometimes then you're not going out Friday night with the girlfriends. You're not hanging out and playing softball with the buds. You're not doing some of these different things because you've got the young family. And so your network tends to change and you tend to be hanging out with other young adults that have young kids or older adults that have young kids. But you are kind of cut off and you're transitioning your social network, right? You're getting away from the crowd that you used to go out with, that blow off steam with, that you used to bounce ideas off of. And now because of family, you're becoming a little bit more lonely, a little bit more isolated. So I don't want to go into too much more because I know I'm going to have DeeDee on and we are going to do a bit of a deep dive on her article. Again, that name is A Grandparent's Response to the Surgeon General's Advisory on Parents' Mental Health. And I'll be putting a link into the show notes for that blog article, as well as you'll be able to get over to the Surgeon General's report on the stress for parents. A couple of things I do want to focus on and share some thoughts on is the what we can do as grandfathers, right? Because I want to take a look and keep focused on what grandfathers can do to help out. One of the things we can do is be aware that the stress today is different from when we were parents. And I know that's a no duh because every generation's stress is different than the generation before. A couple of contributors to the increased level of stress is that the working hours and the availability of the office to contact you after you leave the office or after you shut down the laptop, whatever you're doing, has increased quite a bit. If you go back and you think about your parents' jobs, there were certain circumstances, sure, where typically dad, if I'm thinking back into the 80s and 70s and whatnot, typically dad, but sometimes moms, might get a phone call after working hours on the weekends. Maybe they're taking a staycation day and working on the deck at the house, and somebody calls them on a Tuesday while they're at home doing some different work. Generally, though, you were not accessible to your managers, to the people that you were working with once you left the office. We didn't have cell phones really. People had access to your home phones, certainly, and that's where the exceptions for some of this came in. But you weren't seeing text messages. You weren't seeing emails flying across. You weren't seeing some of these things. And so I think one thing that we have to appreciate as grandfathers is that our sons and our daughters are almost always on. And certainly there's times where they can turn off notifications and they can do different things. But until we get to a point where we come back to some hard, fast rules about expectations of when you respond to communications off hours, dealing with work, I think this is just going to be an area of stress. And certainly, too, the other things that we need to be aware of is that you have all sorts of different diagnoses that are going on with children these days that we didn't have. We didn't have, you know, such a wide spectrum. Let's say just picking on autism, you didn't have that spectrum, right? You kind of had, it was almost like you either had it or you didn't. And then as things and diagnostic tools got better, we've now elongated that. So we've got more kids getting diagnosed, and we've got more things that parents need to be aware of. We also have a lot more stuff going on in schools and a lot more worries. I know when I was growing up or when I was a young dad, um, there wasn't a question of what's the right age to give a kid a cell phone, or when can kids get email addresses or get a laptop or a tablet or anything like that. There's just a lot more to consider that parents go through today. And I would even say the current financial situation, right? Um, I do remember late 70s, the inflation that was going on where you even had mortgages at 12%. You might have loans out there at prime plus one, prime plus two, and you had these types of situations going on. A lot of kids, a lot of young parents today, if they're trying to get into starter homes, one, the affordability and the pricing of the home, it is just gotten crazy. And then also the amount of money it's going to take, and that monthly payment is crazy right now with the way interest rates are. So hopefully some of that will be coming down. And these are just some things that I wanted to bring up and discuss about, the stress today with young parents is different from necessarily what we had in the 80s and 90s. What we had as parents, as Gen X parents, right? Especially. And then baby boomers, we can even go further back and talk about the differences. One of the big things we can do as grandfathers is make sure that when we call, maybe have some calls with the adult children, and make sure you check in with your sons and your daughters, your son-in-laws, your daughter-in-laws, and ask them how they're doing. Don't even bring up the grandkids. Just call, say hello. If you find out, hopefully you found out what kind of some of their interests are. So if there's something in the news, you can call them, bring that up, and then just use that as a bit of a check-in, because then it also shows that you care about them. A great example is one of my daughter-in-laws grew up in Maryland and is a huge Orioles fan. And the Orioles, after so long, they just flat out sucked for a long time. They are doing so much better now. And so every once in a while, I'm doing a text, I'm doing a call, I'm doing something, and I'm talking to her about the Orioles and how they're going. If they're going into a big series with the Yankees or the Astros or somebody else, and just kind of, using those interests that we know about our daughter-in-laws or our son-in-laws, using those as those connection points to then be able to, one, call up and you ask them how the baseball team's doing, how the hockey team's doing, something hobby related, whatever it is. And then also just, hey, how are you guys doing? Are you everything going okay? What kind of big plans do you have? And just doing that check-in, I think, really means a lot, and something that grandfathers can really do to make things easy and make sure that those kids and those kids' partners, everybody knows that you care about them and you're not just calling because of the grandkids. The next thing I want to talk about too is, be aware if you're a long distance grandparent like myself, when I'm going to say when you go on site to your children's homes, um, be mindful, be noticing what's going on. Did they normally keep a really tidy home, and now it's really kind of messy? Things have gotten really cluttered, and this doesn't come from a judgmental standpoint at all. This is more of a case of these can be signs that they're having trouble coping and cleaning and doing things that they normally used to do have fallen by the wayside. And certainly with toddlers, with little kids and things like that, houses are going to be messy. We understand and expect that, but there's certain other parts of that that you can keep an eye out for. And certainly that is, I think, an indicator of how well or how not so well the kids are doing, is when you notice things are kind of out of sorts from the usual. And we have the luxury of not being there every single day. So when we go away, we come back a few months, maybe a year later, and things are noticeably different. That can be a tell that you need to start asking some questions about how they're doing, and really find out, what do they need from you to support them so that they can get their feet back under themselves, because they may have been rocked by businesses going through, I don't know, call it whatever you want, but it's layoffs. Maybe they're extremely nervous about that. Maybe they've experienced that layoff and they're really struggling just to get up and get going in the day and do more than just the basics. And so some of those things can lead to discussions if you're aware and you're paying attention to what's going on around the house. The other thing I think grandfathers need to avoid is don't get into a contest of talking about your stress as a young dad versus their stress as young parents. I think sometimes we get into doing that. And to me, sometimes that's even just sharing and building a connection, right? Like, oh my gosh, we had such a bad day with our granddaughter at school. She did this, and we got hauled into the principal's office to talk to him about disciplinary actions. Sometimes it can be taken the wrong way if you go, oh yeah, I remember what a big pain in the butt you were and how you got into fights at school and how I had to leave work early and go do this and go do that. And sometimes that compare and contrast can really come off as you handled things so much better than they did. Because remember, they're not past that experience yet. They don't have that perspective of, hey, this was a big deal or this was a little deal. Everything that they're going through is a big deal. And I think for us to come in and share some of those stories can lead to a little bit of like, well, my dad, my father-in-law, they had all their stuff together. They handled this so well. And then it internalizes with them with, why can't I be more like my dad? Or why can't I be more like my father-in-law handled this situation? Or whatever it might be. We've got to be careful on doing that. There's certainly a time to sit around the table eating a bowl of ice cream and swapping potty training stories, right? Some of that's just to build up rapport and maybe give our kids a good ribbing, if that's your style of communication and getting on with people. But just be aware that sometimes as dads and grandfathers, we don't need to be jumping in and comparing, contrasting what's going on in the heat of the moment with our experiences. We need to oftentimes just be there to listen and to gently provide some guidance, with the understanding that that guidance may or may not be taken. It may just be they need to hear some different alternatives, and maybe they've already thought of those, and maybe they haven't. So I think our gift to them is not getting into a contest of who had it worse as a 26-year-old young father, but rather it's more of a case of like, oh, hey, when we were going through something similar, here's a couple of things that worked for us. They might work for you, they might not, but something to think about, and having that approach, I think shows one that you're empathetic. Two, you're not trying to tell them how great you were, but you're trying to share a possible solution that worked in your case. So you got to kind of walk a line a little bit. And I hope you enjoyed that this input on these things that I think fathers can help out with when it comes to supporting parents when it comes to their mental health. And again, I don't want to do too much because I think this conversation that I'm going to have with DeeDee is going to be a lot more in depth. She really specializes on the connections between first-time young parents and first-time young grandparents, and kind of building those communication networks, building the support networks, understanding expectations on both sides. So this will, think of this maybe as a little bit of a teaser. Hopefully there's some good ideas in here. Hopefully there's some things where it's like, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't be doing this. And then look forward to probably November, December, this conversation that I'm going to have with DeeDee to come out, where we're really going to do much more of a deep dive into both the Surgeon General's advisory and her blog. And again, that blog is a grandparent's response to the Surgeon General's advisory on parents' mental health. So I'm going to have a link for that down into the show notes, but you can also go to morethangran.com and you can check that out as well and just go right there. So however you want to get to it, that's awesome. Do me a favor. When you're listening to this, go down into the show notes, or I'm sorry, the podcast app that you're watching this on. Look for the share button. If you're on iTunes, hit that and then put somebody's email address into this that you know would appreciate not only this episode, but the Cool Grandpa podcast. If you're on some of the other podcast apps, look for the open-ended triangle with the three little circles. Click on that. That's typically the share button. And then you can email this to somebody in your network, or you can direct message and sometimes even send it through social media like Facebook or some of the other applications that allow you to do that. But sharing this podcast is a great way to help grow the audience, great way to help other grandparents and grandfathers in particular know that their relationships and their place within the family is super important and is definitely needed. So we want to encourage all the grandfathers out there to be involved, to be proactive, to really take their place within the family unit and help those adult kids that we have, and then help our grandchildren as well. So that's enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Remember, 200th episode is coming out in a couple of weeks, and next week we're going to be sharing Patrick Brady's interview and learning more about Heritage HQ. So a couple of great things coming up in the next couple of weeks. And until next time, remember to stay cool.